sun was sinking behind the red cliffs of Arizona when rancher Samuel Clay rode home after a long day herding cattle. The dry wind carried a strange sound, not the howl of a coyote, but a faint cry. He pulled the reins, listening again. There it was, a voice weak, desperate. Following the echo, Samuel discovered something that froze his blood. A man was tied to an old mesquite tree at the edge of the canyon, his face battered, his lips cracked from thirst. The stranger looked half dead, covered in dust and dried blood. Samuel jumped off his horse, cut the ropes, and poured water on his lips. "Who did this to you?" Samuel asked. The man barely whispered. "They said I stole from the ranch." "Your ranch?" Samuel stiffened. His ranch hands had been restless lately, a string of cattle. Thefts had turned them suspicious of everyone. But this man? He didn't recognize him. Still something in his eyes. Pain mixed with innocence. Made. Samuel hesitated before calling him a thief. He took the man home, nursed him for 2 days, and waited for answers. When the stranger finally regained strength, his name came out, Eli Turner, a drifter looking for work. He said he had come to Samuel's ranch a week ago, offering help. But someone framed him for stealing horses and beat him near to death. Samuel's heart burned with doubt. He wanted to believe the man. Yet his foreman, Jed Brooks, had told him Eli was caught red-handed. So Samuel decided to investigate quietly. The unthinkable revelation. Late one night, Samuel overheard Jed and another hand arguing in the barn. What he heard made his blood run cold. Jed had been running a secret trade, stealing Samuel's cattle and selling them across state lines, and he had blamed Eli to cover his tracks. When Eli caught them red-handed, they tied him up and left him to die in the desert. Samuel loaded his revolver, kicked open the barn door, and confronted Jed. The truth burst into chaos. Bullets tore through the night air. A fierce gunfight under the flickering lantern light. When the smoke cleared, Jed lay wounded, and his partner fled into the dark. Eli, still weak but standing, stepped forward. "You saved my life twice," he said. Samuel nodded grimly. "No man deserves to die for another's greed." Days later, Jed was turned over to the law. The ranch slowly returned to peace, but Samuel never forgot that night. He offered Eli a permanent place on the ranch, not as a worker, but as a partner. Sometimes Samuel would look out over the horizon and remember how close one man came to dying for a crime he didn't commit. In the Wild West, justice often came late, but when it did, it came with fire and truth. And as the dust settled on the open plains, the name of Eli Turner became a story whispered in saloons. The man who was tied up, left to die, and saved by the one he was accused of stealing from. The sun had barely lifted its face over the mesas when Samuel Clay saddled up his chestnut horse and rode out toward the canyon again. The wind was cold and dry, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and the ghosts of the night before. Jed Brooks was in the county jail now. But Samuel's heart still carried the weight of betrayal heavier than any saddlebag. The ranch felt different, quiet. Suspicious eyes followed him wherever he walked. Men whispered when he passed. Jed had friends, and those friends had tempers. Eli Turner stood near the corral, his arms still wrapped in bandages, the faint scars on his face catching the morning light. He looked stronger now, though a kind of haunted stillness followed him like a shadow. When Samuel approached, Eli tipped his hat slightly, that mix of gratitude and caution still between them. "You think they'll come back for him?" Eli asked. Samuel squinted toward the horizon. Men like Jed don't stay alone long. He'll have kin or friends trying to clean up his mess. That night, the ranch seemed to breathe in fear. The coyotes howled longer than usual, and even the horses were restless in their stalls. Samuel sat by the fireplace, his Winchester rifle resting across his knees, the sound of the ticking clock the only thing moving in the room. He thought of his late wife, Anna, and how she used to tell him that sometimes justice wasn't enough. You had to forgive to find peace, but the image of Eli tied to that tree kept burning through his thoughts, and he knew there'd be no peace while the rest of Jed's men were still out there. A few days later, word came from the sheriff in Dry Creek. Jed Brooks had escaped during a prison transport. 2 deputies were dead. Samuel's heart sank as he read the telegram. Eli found him standing outside the barn, jaw tight, telegram crushed in his fist. "Jed's gone," Samuel said simply. Eli's eyes hardened, his voice low. "Then he's coming here." For the next 3 days, the ranch prepared for war. Samuel gathered his ranch hands, sorting out who could be trusted and who couldn't. Few packed their things and left before sundown. Those who stayed knew what was coming. The desert air thickened with tension. By the fourth night, they set up watch posts around the property. Samuel barely slept. His eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, waiting for a flicker of fire or the glint of a rifle barrel. It was the fifth night when hell broke loose. The first gunshot came from the north side, near the horse pens. Then another. The dogs barked wildly. Men shouted in confusion. Samuel grabbed his rifle and ran into the yard. The sound of boots pounding behind him. Eli was already out there, crouched behind a wagon wheel, returning fire into the dark. Muzzle flashes lit the night like lightning over dry land. Jed's here, Eli shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. Samuel ducked behind a trough, firing at the shadows. A bullet whined past his ear, splintering the wood beside him. The air was thick with gunpowder and dust. Then, out of the dark, a voice called, low, taunting, familiar. You should have left me to die, Clay. Jed's voice echoed off the barn walls. You think you can take what's mine? You think you can just play hero? Samuel steadied his breathing. You brought this on yourself, Jed. You left a man to die for your lies. A laugh answered him, cold and jagged. And I'll finish what I started. The gunfight raged until the moon climbed high and the fire from the barn cast, everything in a ghostly orange glow. Two of Samuel's men fell, one shot in the shoulder, another dead before he hit the ground. Eli moved through the smoke like a man possessed, his revolver blazing with precision. For every shot Jed's men fired, Eli answered with two. His movements were swift, deliberate, almost too calm for the storm around him. When the dust finally settled, the yard was littered with the wounded and dying. The fire crackled behind them, and the air smelled of burned hay and blood. But Jed was nowhere to be found. He had slipped away again, into the canyon's dark veins, like a snake retreating to its hole. Samuel leaned against the fence, breathing hard. His knuckles were white around the rifle. He'll be back, he muttered. Eli nodded slowly. Then we'll be ready next time. For weeks after, life on the ranch returned to a fragile rhythm. Men repaired fences, buried the dead, and tried to forget the echo of gunfire. But Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every morning, he'd find boot prints near the edge of the property, always one set, always fresh. Jed was out there, waiting. One night, Eli came into the house, his hat pulled low. Found something, he said, tossing a small metal badge onto the table. It was tarnished, old, a U.S. Marshal's star. Samuel frowned. Where'd you get this? Eli looked uneasy. From one of the men who attacked the ranch. He wasn't no ordinary outlaw. He had this pinned inside his vest. That discovery turned everything on its head. Jed hadn't been working alone. He'd been part of something bigger. Maybe a network of lawmen turned smugglers, using their badges to move stolen cattle and gold across territories. It explained how Jed escaped prison so easily. He wasn't just an outlaw. He was protected. Samuel and Eli decided to ride to Dry Creek to speak with Sheriff Dalton, a man known for his honesty. But when they reached the town, the sheriff's office was empty. The door hung open, the desk overturned, blood smeared across the floorboards. The telegram machine was smashed to pieces. Samuel bent down and found a note pinned under a knife. It read, "Go home, Clay, this ain't your fight." They rode back in silence, the wind whipping through the canyon. When they reached the ranch, the sky was turning purple with dusk. Eli spoke first. He's not just after you now. He's after everyone who knows. Samuel nodded grimly. Then we end it where it began, at the canyon. The following evening, they prepared for the final ride. Samuel cleaned his rifle one last time, the same weapon that had defended his land for 20 years. Eli loaded his revolvers, his face set in stone. Before they left, Samuel paused at the doorway and looked back at the house. The rocking chair by the fire moved gently in the breeze. He whispered a quiet prayer, not for victory, but for the strength to finish what had begun. They reached the canyon by midnight. The wind howled through the rocks like a living thing. Every shadow looked alive, every rustle a threat. Then, from behind the rocks, voices rose, and there he was. Jed Brooks, standing under the pale moonlight, his hat tilted back, a sneer curling his lips. He looked older, harder, his eyes sharp as broken glass. Beside him were two men with rifles drawn. "Thought you'd come," Jed said. "You always were too proud to stay put." Samuel raised his rifle. "You took enough from me, Jed. It ends tonight." Jed smirked. "You think you're the hero, huh? You don't even know half the truth. You think, Eli, there's some innocent soul you saved. Ask him where he came from before he found your ranch. Ask him what he was running from. Samuel's gaze flicked toward Eli. What's he talking about? Eli's face darkened, jaw tightening. He's lying. Jed laughed, the sound echoing like a rattle. Am I? Tell him, Eli. Tell him how you used to ride with the Dalton gang, how you left them to burn in a shootout and ran with their money. Samuel's grip on his rifle faltered slightly. He turned to Eli, searching his face. That true? Silence fell heavy across the canyon. Eli dropped to one knee, catching his breath. Samuel approached slowly, lowering his rifle. The stars above shimmered cold and distant, the desert wind carrying away the smell of smoke and blood. They buried Jed by the river that ran through the canyon, not out of mercy, but out of duty. When dawn came, the sky burned gold over the cliffs. Samuel looked at Eli, who stood staring at the grave, his past finally unearthed. Guess there's no running from who we were, Eli said quietly. Samuel nodded. No, but there's always a choice in who we become. The two men mounted their horses and rode back toward the ranch, the sun rising behind them, like a promise, and the wind whispering over the endless wild land. A land that had seen men tied up and left to die, and men rise from their own ashes to live again.